Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. You are watching it live with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey just joined our stream. Good evening. Let's start with Kharkov. Kharkov is on the mind of many, and it's not only Kharkov, it's also Sumy now, according to interview that Budanov of Ukrainian military intel gave to New York Times. Sumy is also a risk. And he says that attacks of Russian Federation will continue in Kharkov for about 3 or 4 days, after which they will also make a move against Sumy. And this is not the only interesting thing he said. He also said that I've used everything I could. We don't have anything else left in the reserve, and we will not be able to stabilize front and push Russians behind the border again. Russian goal is to deplete Ukrainian reserves, which are already at the bottom, and to also sow panic and frustration. So I think the main point we can talk about here is, even though it may be somewhat secretive information, but he did talk about it, that reserves are depleted. And this is a key point because it is probably a military secret. We normally would not even be talking about it, but since General Budanov already mentioned it, we can probably discuss it. All right, let's start with the beginning. Budanov is in a very specific situation. The main task of intel is to prevent sudden attack of the enemy on his country. The opening of a new front in the north that wasn't before, that was closed after the first phase of this war. If one is looking at that rather strictly, one can think that he did not fulfill his job, didn't do his duty to prevent that. Well, on the intel side, their task is also to warn, not to defend. And here is a big scandal brewing that we'll be looking into today, and then historians after this war will be looking into this as well. It's a kind of exemplary scandal. 2.5 years of war. Everything is very expected. Attack from the north in the Kharkov direction was considered by everybody. Only the lazy one didn't talk about it. And for the last 2 months, there have been warnings coming. Our partners were warning us as well. In the modern world, one cannot hide the concentration of troops across the border. We already knew even the detachments they were bringing there. 11th Corps from Kaliningrad, 44th from Leningrad or St. Petersburg area. But a sudden attack still turns out to be rather successful. They captured about 12 different villages. There's different data coming. And there is a whole set of disconnects that comes to view. First is, why did not we do anything if we knew that they'll be attacking there? Different military officers coming from that area saying that, guys, there are no landmines and there are no fortifications. Then some of the bureaucrats are coming in from the military higher levels saying that, well, there are some fortifications, but they are further deeper in, they're not on the front. The first area is just to make sure the enemy gets worn out before they reach the fortifications. While the military on the front say there is nothing before that. There is no Maginot line, there is no mines, there is no nothing. And the third group comes and says, well, no, everything is there, it's just the Commander Galushenko is rather weak, there is a new one who replaced him, so they're moving the problem to the cadre area. Today in Ukrainian Pravda, fourth line of thought was published about the money that were transferred to the accounts of fake companies, that the money dedicated to defend Kharkov have been stolen due to usual banal corruption, which is a co-author in this way of this situation. Then there is a fifth angle that Russian Volunteer Corps and Legion Freedom of Russia were also crossing the border in that area with their raids to Russian territory. When they were coming back, did they put the mines back in place because they removed them to cross it first? A lot of questions, a lot of people throwing shit at each other, accusing Yaroslavsky and the others who are fighting there, and corruption, incompetence, Ministry of Infrastructure trying to figure out who and how the money were sent. On the backdrop of that, there is Blinken visit to Kyiv. And I do have one ironclad argument about any defense statements at this point. All right, mine's perhaps military issue. The quality of fortifications, questionable, understood. The drawing and the layout of these fortifications closer to the border, that can be discussed as well. But could you at least evacuate people? If you knew that the attack is imminent, could you evacuate people from those villages? For that, you don't need billions of money that can be transferred to some fake accounts, and it's being checked real quickly. It's either a person in Volchansk or he is out of Volchansk. And that aspect cannot be defended in any fashion. Ukrainian military at the day of invasion published an article in Ukrainian Pravda that they knew the playbook the Russians will be using. Then, okay, if our country knew that, why our leadership didn't do anything? Did you not tell the leadership? I'm quite sure they did. That means the leadership dropped the ball. And it is very reminiscent of the beginning of war, of the 24th of February. Such a mess. But it's a third year of war. What's happening with our organization, with our planning? And I'm trying to pick words here, but it does look very much like deterioration of management, when everything is known, but nothing is ready. And one can circumnavigate any accusation. You can talk about how things are being done, whether fortifications are being constructed. Apparently, some of the concrete elements are being piled up and just somewhere waiting to be installed. But you cannot counter the question of whether the person was evacuated or whether they were left in danger of Russian invasion. How many of them are under occupation now? How many of the houses are being invaded by Russian military? How many of our citizens were, God forbid, executed? And Budanov is doing, it's not a big secret, he actually picked whatever he has in reserves on the intel side and threw them in there to stop and slow down the Russian move. And as a head of intel, he's saying he doesn't have anything left. He doesn't have anything else to bring to Sumy when Russia will target Sumy next. He's telling the society and the leadership that there will be a Sumy attack, it's imminent, and we're not ready for it. And he is out of reserves to do anything about it. So a question, if we'll have the second breakthrough like this, how do we qualify it? Budanov is not afraid to talk about it. He is a brave fella, and he needs to explain what happened in the face of society. That's why he has to talk about it. But imagine now, near Sumy or anywhere on the northern border, new Russian groups coming through. And there could be very few of them, could be just a battalion. We understand that in strategic and operative meaning it means nothing. But informationally, that creates a whole other element. Understandably, that new front that Russia opens in the north can be very, very small, but there'll be a discussion that Russia can open another front. And in the west, that will birth another discussion about 60 billion that were just adopted for Ukraine, and where is Ukraine, why they're not using it, what's happening. And I think Blinken's visit to Kyiv is a very important one. Looking at his press conference and some of the slips that he mentioned, at least one of the questions is Kharkov question, and maybe Sumy as well, but he also did mention the need of mobilization. Whatever the actors close to Ukrainian power and pro-government authorities in Ukraine would state, that Americans were slow-walking aid to Ukraine, not because they're scoundrels and scumbags, but because we were not making moves that they were waiting us to make. The moment we signed the mobilization law, that's when the support package was adopted. So a question, if we signed mobilization law in December, perhaps there would not be an interruption in supplies. And now with the army that was not refilled with new recruits, that army was being stretched too thin and it's starting to tear apart. We've been asking, remember, for quite a few streams a few months ago, how long can the army stand? Now it is torn. The army is not enough to hold Russian actions. There are just not enough people, blunt and dumb. And now we have, adopted this bill for mobilization, violating a lot of rights, and undermining the whole concept of legal rights with our citizens in some cases. While we get new people, it'll probably be mid-May when we start, while it'll take some months or weeks at best for them to get to the front, to start refilling the depleted detachments. And here we have the situation when the head of Intel is coming out and saying, we have warned. So as a society, we should ask Commander-in-Chief, Supreme Commander-in-Chief, what the heck were you thinking about? Because that was discussed in your meetings too, I'm quite sure. Intel was giving you data. Who is going to be responsible for that? And now Russians would need to do only one simple thing, just bring 3 small groups of 10 to 15 people there near Sumy, pretend there's a big scary new front there, provide enough media coverage, and the level of question will become an avalanche like in Ukraine. Our internet and telegrams in Ukraine will be steaming, and people will be asking a lot of questions. How come our leadership fails to do such a simple thing as protect the territory that was expected to be attacked for at least 2 months already? What is going on? And that would be a red line running across all the news channels in Ukraine. What is going on with our defense? That's why these operations have much less military implication than PSYOP implications, because they make Ukraine ask more questions, and not only Ukraine, as we see by the visit of Blinken. What is going on in military political leadership in Ukraine? The West, Britain's, US, France, they all start asking these questions. It's been 2 years since the beginning of war. You supposedly learned some things and got some experience. What's happening? Now back to the incursions of Legion of Russia and Russian Volunteer Corps from Ukraine into Russia proper territory. Russians, to their respect, were actually defending their territories more organized. They were doing it in a more organized fashion. Perhaps it's our time to be more prepared. So this is a very uncomfortable story, a very disturbing story. And it reveals that the level of this problem is so high that it cannot be concealed anymore. It just keeps popping out here and there. However you hide it, it's like that nail popping out of the rag sack. The level of control of our military has deteriorated to such a level that it cannot be concealed anymore. And one should ask a question here. How did it get to this? You've been getting experience for 2.5 years fighting this war, learning and training. How can you pass the exam worse than when the war started? This is a central question that society needs an answer. This is an answer that's also needed for military who are bedazzled by our leadership. Another question to you. I have very strong parallels in my mind when Budanov is reaching out internationally to New York Times and other media sources and sends such an alarmist signal about Sumy and reserves. I have parallels about situation with Zelensky when he had to give similar signals and send them externally to reach the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian politicians without having direct good contact with leadership apparently at this point. Does it imply that Budanov also has issues communicating with the president at this point? No, I don't think he has issues with communication itself. I think he has issues with being understood. They do not understand, do not give enough emphasis to what he is trying to say. How can that be, Alexey? Well, I've met with that hundreds of times. You explain these bureaucrats that this is what's going to happen. This is the basics of this logic, and it will be better for you if you make these steps. Your ratings will not fall, the situation will be contained. They would look back at you and say, what? There is just a level of competence. I think some of them have been promoted way beyond their level of competence. What's still puzzling to me, after 2.5 years of leading the country during the war, how could you deteriorate your cognizance to such a level that you perform worse than when the war started? I understand that some people can be non-educatable, but they deteriorated. What I see here is that Budanov is trying to remove himself from all that and to let everybody know that I warned everybody. I did everything I could. I do not have any reserves, and I'm sending the warning to everybody. Now, the next question is, what's going on in the government if the head of military intel has to go to media to address the society? There was a publication in The Economist, Alexey, where, among other things, they also quote Pavel Fedosenko, commander of the 92nd Brigade, which was helping to liberate Kharkov area in September of 22. He is saying that if we will not be fighting for Konstantinovka and Drushkovka, probably the next goals of Russia, in several days after that, they will get to Dnieper, Kharkov, and Kryvyi Rog. He's thinking that it's 70% probability that Russia will be able to occupy the rest of Donbass. The matter is how long it'll take. That's the only question remaining, and how much damage can Ukraine inflict onto Russia. And this is another sign of things falling apart. Commander of a brigade, he can be a golden specialist. I don't know this fellow personally. He can be, a triple hero of Ukraine, but he should not be quoting these topics in the media. This is not the level of the brigade commander. The person who is not a military or government official, he can talk about anything, including colonization of Alpha Centauri, but brigade commander should not be voicing and commenting on the battle actions of the whole front with 1,000 kilometers length. This is not analytical category. This is just his figure of speech and his opinion, but people are coming to him, and apparently he's open to the media to discuss, and that implies a direct deterioration of communication. For several weeks, as we talked before, different speakers from the military, they are making very contradictory statements. Remember the beginning of war, did we have that? Don't quite remember that. Right, it wasn't, because other people, and we won't point fingers here, were working in the media coverage. We're organizing that and sending a coherent message. Everything that's happening there indicates for me growing signs of deterioration and things crumbling. To me, it is a very significant sign that speakers of different troops, of different branches of military, start talking about very non-matching levels of things to their position, and they also carry different opinions into the media. Some of them may be 100% right, of course, but they should not be publicly voicing that. The level of prognosticating where Russians will get, what settlements and towns may they occupy, this is maybe a general level, the commander of the front level. Even then, he would need to coordinate that with the leadership. And then the fact that he's making these statements, now we're not talking whether it's true or not, it perhaps sends a signal that this is the only way for him to send a message, because he sees that his leadership and the country leadership does not understand him or refuse to understand him. He understands that he is risking a lot of things, he is taking big personal risk that he'll be hit for, but he needs to go there and make these statements. By the way, 92nd Brigade is actually fighting there next to Kharkov. They're basically defending their own people, their own homes on that front. And there were several more concerning signals from other officers this week. Many of them were very incongruent between themselves. That, again, shows that the army is screaming. It's taking personal risk for statements that they definitely will be reprimanded for, same as Budanov is doing. But they're trying to essentially tell us that in the system of defense of Ukraine, in the armed forces of Ukraine, situation, to be polite, politically correct, is screaming. Because they are violating a lot of laws, a lot of regulations with these interviews, both de facto and by content of his message. And I think this is the scream of despair. They're trying to send the message to us. There was another interview published by The Economist by the commander of the ground forces, Alexander Pavlyuk. He is saying that the critical phase in this war is approaching. The next couple months will be critical. And he's referencing if Ukraine gets enough aid from the West, it may turn the tide against the Russians. But again, this is a probability. May not. But the fact that he is calling it a critical phase, that we are in it, we have analyzed it before. And there were some signals that perhaps by the end of March there might be a big issue, almost a collapse of the front. We lived through March, through April. Now it's May upon us, and that takes us to the longer end of the framework that was prognosed by American side. Are we in a critical phase or we're not? We are, definitely we are, Nikolai. This was slowly aggregating since autumn, and since March, the end of March, it started to threaten the front. This is seen by the fact that people who were not supposed to be in the trenches were sent to the front line. The scribes, the air defense people, communication people, but even that resource is gone. It's depleted. They already are wounded, removed from the front. And there is another very uncomfortable element to that situation, and we have talked about that before, but I feel like we need to repeat it again. If a detachment is losing about 30% of its personnel, dead and wounded, it doesn't lose its traditions. You can just remove them from the front, rotate them, refill with new people, and then you'll have 7 veterans for 3 newcomers, and all the traditions and training remains. If you have lost about a half of detachment, you can still keep it, but it'll take you much longer to bring them back to the same level of readiness as they were before. And if you lose 70%, this is non-repairable. And here we have many of the detachments being lost all the way up to 100%. That's what Russians were doing at the beginning of the war. We also do not have a constant organ of management above a brigade level. This is where a very important operative level experience are usually accumulated. Russians have it, and slowly, in a dumb fashion, they're not too bright, but they're still getting experience, the same people commanding different detachments on hundreds, a couple hundred kilometers on the front, using different means. They have been accumulating and evolving their skill. We definitely can see it on the front. On our side, it is not growing because all organs of command and management above brigade, they're temporary. Even if you get a good team there, it'll be a temporary team that will be disbanded at some point later, and they cannot transfer their experience to anybody. So starting March, we already see brigades being pulled apart, so they're not fighting as one cohesive body. Now you can see one battalion fighting here and another 200 kilometers away. And now, what happened if a brigade was holding a position and then 2 battalions were removed from it? So whatever is left on that position, they don't have enough forces to hold it. And they'll likely be eradicated in the process of Russians pushing forward. So if we had crumbling before, now we have crumbling and essentially wiping out some of our units. What we used initially in the war, we've been destroying Russian units to 80, 100%, so they would not be able to transfer any experience. What's happening now on our side is very similar. We're losing up to 100% of some detachments, and we're not gaining anywhere, while they gain some experience on the operative level. And we have some brigades that have not moved by a centimeter since the beginning of war. Now they're falling back because they're being pulled apart. They're losing some of the components, some of the parts of their brigades, because they're being pulled to different places trying to plug the holes. And these media appearances of different officers, these are attempts to scream, to bring attention to a very dire situation. And we did not pay enough attention to rotate and to maintain the existing good brigades. We instead built a bunch of new ones. And on paper, you would have a new brigade that looks like a brigade, but their battle worthiness is less than a company, because they have never been to the front yet. They do not have experience, starting from the lowest ranks to commander. And formally, we have a brigade, but in reality, oops, and we lose Ocheretina, even though there was a whole brigade or even 2 standing there. And that crisis and catastrophe is only due to a reason, some of different reasons, but delay in mobilization is the biggest of those. And now that we'll be going through, we'll try to expedite without proper training, whatever they'll be saying, but we'll need to plug the holes. This is the consequence of prolonged mobilization bill review. If we did that in December, that would have been planned effort. People would have enough time to be trained. They would be coming to groups on the front that are not fully eradicated. When 2 newbies are being met by 8 veterans and they can transfer experience, they can transfer knowledge. And now we have a catastrophic situation because we delayed our mobilization so long. But our congressmen, they did cover their asses. They did everything according to the letter. They reviewed every amendment to this bill, even if some of them were idiotic. I would remind how Americans were adopting the bill on Ukraine. The Speaker was declining different amendments. We could have declined a bunch of amendments. Just Yulia Tymoshenko's party introduced, 1,500 of those? So our congressmen were not reviewing anything, and then at the end they started, and they were losing time. At that time when our military were losing their battle worthiness and capabilities and best detachments. And now add to that lack of fortifications, stolen funds, lack of work on the second line, third line, and the Russians added some effort on the front. And they're adding a north front as well. And we're coming back to the old wisdom that order always beats class. You can have a better class, you can have a freer army, more inventive teams, more inventive people, more creative, but they provided for the order. And the dumb order, not bright, however they do it by hook and by crook, they're still getting their results. And on our side, we did not add any order, and we have dropped in our class, because those who've been holding the front for 6 months without American aid, they didn't come here because we are not doing mobilization effort and not having well-trained, well-skilled personnel. So I can qualify that only as the biggest crime against Ukrainian people. Every single one of those congressmen, how many of them are there? 415? They need to be responsible, held accountable for that. Every scumbag that was throwing those worthless amendments, every representative of the cabinet of ministers who was slow-walking that, who spent 1/5 of this war to adopt a new bill on mobilization, while the army was drowning in its blood, while everybody, including the most precious specialties, were thrown in the front line. They were getting wounded, and we basically were losing the skills. And now we have 9 people holding 1.5 kilometers of the front. You can be 10 times hero, but it's just not physically possible. You cannot be monitoring 150 yards both ways to cover that reliably. And the worst part of that is that Russians are also in their low point. Everything is also very bad there. If we conducted mobilization on time, we would be the ones picking direction of attack, and they would be their front would be crumbling. So this is the biggest crime against our country. So what's happening in Sumy, in Kharkov, these are new things added. And we've been talking about difficult situations here and there, but when a new front opens, that makes it more visible. It becomes obvious even for a non-specialist, and even a regular citizen in Ukraine starts asking questions. What the heck is going on in our defense system? Utter incompetence, utter deterioration. It has specific people with specific last names behind it. I would call the organ by the organs, not by the last names. There should be a commission after the war reviewing that. As in normal countries, there should be an investigative committee reviewing all the events and punishing those who deserve that. I would be the first proponent of that commission. If it needs to work for 10 years, I would keep it open for 10 years, especially on the matters of timely mobilization, and especially the questions of timely mobilization. Those who are at fault need to be prosecuted. Even what's happening now is very improper to our citizens. All these captures of cargo truck drivers who leave us without supplies, all these denials of consular services to every third Ukrainian overseas, our withdrawal from several human rights agreements in Europe. These are horrible decisions. In the old times, they would be executed summarily for these decisions. In Russia, however, they're doing it in a much dumber fashion, but they're still doing it, and they're continuing with their order. And now it's about time when the order is starting to prevail over a class. We have lost our high-class contributors to different reasons, wounded, killed, moved, and we have not got more order. If anything, we have less order now. Again, I do not like ballpark accusations that Syrsky is responsible for everything, he's a butcher, and the other people are saying, no, he is generally all right. He actually posts proper questions. But I do have a question to him. Why was it needed to replace brigade commanders en masse on the front line while Russians are attacking us? What was that due to? Because a new person, even if he is good, it takes time for him to understand the situation. He's being stormed and he doesn't even know his vicinity, he doesn't know his terrain. His team doesn't know his leadership style. It takes time and effort to continue fighting at the same level as before. It's almost as if you're destroying the command outpost. It takes a while for the new one to take real reign and control. And it'll be one thing if we replace bad ones for the good ones. But no, there are a lot of signs from the front that very good ones got replaced with mediocre or even bad ones. And add corruption, add lack of support, that also was late due to mobilization. And that's what we have. Then no surprise that commander of the ground forces is making a public statement that the next couple months are going to be critical. How about we start talking about the real reasons of these critical months? Ground forces represent about 73% of our all defense forces. He might eventually become our commander general. And he comes out and says, this is a critical month. Of course, we will unite and try to hold, but okay, what are the reasons for that critical month? After 2 years of war, we should not have critical months, we should have everything planned. And then we see Budanov running to media on the side and saying, I've done everything I could, winking at Ukrainian society, at public, right? Show us a secret sign that there is something wrong there. And then brigade commanders start to come out and make statements that are very risky because they have no other way to be sure that this information will draw attention. Why Budanov came out? Because it's absolutely a risky decision, a controversial decision, but he had no other ways to deliver that information. Why brigade commanders are saying and going out? Because they understand that nothing is ready, that their brigade will be dying defending this territory, and they are in a very poor shape. And again, one can argue a lot about decisions, military decisions, fortification and all, but a simple question, why have we not evacuated people? Alexey, I want to clarify a couple more things. You did say that everything is crumbling in our leadership. Do you think it has any relation to possible crumbling of the front line and collapse? Do we see that in the future? No, I do not see a collapse in the near future. I think we will withdraw from several places. We might lose several settlements, several villages and small towns. Perhaps Torets, Konstantinovka, Chasov Yar need to get in line and be ready to be taken. Because right now, those people who are being mobilized at this moment will only get to the front about 2 months from now. Even if you train them on a shorter scheme, they will get to a brigade that has been almost wiped out, and there'll be no people to help him train, to prepare him to fight better. And it's about time when somebody starts posting issues to our political leadership that perhaps we should measure our appetites. Because the goals our army is currently getting from Kyiv is to straighten the front line, to not give a perch to an enemy. 23 people cannot defend a territory that should be defended by 650. 650 versus 23. Imagine that. What will happen to these 23 in 3 months? I have a friend writing to me today. He is defending an outpost. He's telling me over 200 mortar rounds fell on their heads in the last 24 hours. He's saying a tank regiment attack is imminent on their position. At least 2 battalions. Tell my wife and children that I love them. That's what he's writing to me. He's their commanding officer. He understands they have no chances. Who will be answering for this? Who will be held accountable? I, for the first time this week, regretted leaving the office of the president. Well, nobody is listening to us. Serious statement. While I was there, I was stomping my feet and sometimes screaming, but I was trying to explain the consequences of taken decisions, of decisions not made. I understand what's happening there in their military sphere, in the office, who is dictating and which logic is getting promoted. While I was there, I was escalating, opening the door with my foot, explaining why these things are important and should be taken care of immediately. I want to say the story of my quitting the office, my firing or quitting, the way I was worked on by media and certain channels. I got some information that somebody really wanted me to leave at that time, because otherwise there would not have been such an attack and so much exacerbated push on that slip about Dnieper. We'll figure it out after the war, probably. But when that fellow by the name of Arestovich was there in the office, there was always an alternative opinion about decisions being made in the sphere of national security. And now I have a feeling that somebody saddled that horse, and there is nobody else who can hold that horse and say, hang on, that horse is going in the wrong direction. Let's stop here and give it a better thought. And what consequences will happen if we will continue going one way or the other. There has to always be an alternative point of view. And I was always presenting that. Sometimes I was only partially right, but what's important is that it was. So people could weigh pros and cons, and they could see alternatives. Right now, it doesn't exist. And this is a very big problem, really big problem. Again, I was actually happy having left the office. But this week, for the first time, is when I regret it. What is going on? This is a horrible thing. I'm picking my words here. All right. We can also remember that you didn't quit on your own. I understand you wrote the statement yourself, but you resigned yourself. But right, yeah, I shouldn't have kept it with my teeth, right? I was really pushed out. Clarified questions about Sumy. Let me ask this question this way. Sumy is not the only direction that is causing concern with different people who are living not too far from the border with our enemy, and where from diversion groups were coming and still going. In Kharkov region, there are actually quite a bit of diversion groups trying to get through. And the message is mostly saying that they do not have much armor in Kharkov area, but they do have a lot of diversion groups. And there are a lot of those groups in Chernigov and Sumy region. And one can see the amount of publications about theft from funds allocated for fortifications, even in Kharkov region, where they traced some of those amounts to companies that were not even aware that they were supposedly getting these contracts. And I think the situation also has the same reflection in Sumy and Chernigov. So let me ask this question. What would be the worst scenario given that dire situation? Right, Nikolai, nobody knows what exactly is happening there, only life will show us. But let's say this. Russia doesn't have enough forces to take Sumy, to take Chernigov, to take Kharkov. They can occupy borderline villages. They can bring field artillery to try to reach cities. And this is basically another part of the front turning hot, where we'll need to drop some forces to stop them and to address it. But their main goal is exactly that, to make sure that we drop forces over there from Chasov Yar and from those areas where they actually are making a push. It's been 2.5 years since the northern border was on fire, right? So here's my question. If the head of intelligence, military intelligence, is saying that Sumy is imminent, is anybody evacuating people there? The head of military intelligence in our country, who has data from NATO, from other sources, he's indicating where another operation will occur. Why are we not evacuating people? How much longer do we need to stay and learn this bloody lesson about people left on the occupied territories? Perhaps we have fantastic fortifications, perhaps we have good resources on the military side to defend this land. But what about people? Why don't we evacuate the north of Chernigov, Sumy, and Kharkov regions? For me, people are the most important element. You can fight for the meters, for these yards and kilometers later. I just calculated today, Germany in the 20th century had changed their territory 7 times to a big degree, and their government setup as well. Czech Republic had their territory changed 5 times. We were under impression after Soviet Union that the borders do not change that easily, but they do. In Europe, a lot of changes occurred. Yugoslavia, Czech Republic, Germany. What are we fighting for? We're fighting for people. Our country, meanwhile, is making conditions for our citizens worse. For example, me being abroad, I can see it naturally. Consular services, bank limitations, some idiotic measures that make it much harder for me to use my own money. Sending money to support our military, I have to gather additional documents and spend 2 more hours to prove the bank that I'm sending this money to a certain detachment. Just half a year ago, I could take money and send it. Cannot do anymore. Presenting documents of these military detachments, their requests, their written asks, very often even that is not enough. One can go mad just trying to support ourselves, our military. And the government is making it worse systemically. And our country either needs to turn its face to its people, including the servicemen, including those who live on the border, or people will eventually refuse to be loyal to that state. We cannot be attacking our own people day after day. We cannot afford to not evacuate people from the front line. How far else can we fall down? Well, okay. Sumy, Kharkov, other regions are also located pretty close to the front line, and there are concerns with people, Alexey, that artillery may start reaching city quarters, outskirts of bigger towns. We understand that, of course, it's a matter of rescuing those who live in smaller villages closer to the immediate front line. But also people in bigger cities are asking questions, and you can sense some panicking mood behind them. So, in the framework of worst scenarios, what do you think we can advise these people to do in these close to the front line regional centers, smaller villages? Everything is very simple, Nikolai. If you are living close to the front, you need to pack and go. I understand it's difficult, but the choice is really dire. Do you want Russian soldiers in your backyard? Or Russian tank next to your house that will be also attacked from our side, and perhaps on accident the shell may hit your house? So it's either that, or you can stay healthy and alive and try your chances in a different part of the country, especially about children and women and elderly. They have no business being there. And in the bigger cities, those who live closer, I think they do understand how to carry on. As for the risk of artillery, field artillery to attack cities, the risk is minimal because they likely will be heavily engaged on the front. In order for them to shoot up the city, they need to run out of targets on the front line. And I think they will have enough targets there. Kharkov can be reached by measures of the senior commander, like gliding bombs, missiles. Today they hit the multi-story building. So I would not be so concerned about field artillery. Even if that happens, they will not be carrying systemic character. There could be separate incidents, but otherwise we'll not let them do it. Life in the frontline cities is difficult. People understand that. They have lived through the last 2 years there. We understand that there will not be an attempt to encircle that town, these towns, but every adult in the city has his own choice, her own choice to make. As for small villages by the front line, absolutely, I would suggest leave them, evacuate. And if you can, help the others. Make sure you evacuate children and perhaps try to evacuate the elderly if you can. But that's where the state needs to be providing aid, providing resources, and facilitating that. And they have to not only evacuate people, but also provide additional opportunity for them to live, to work. Otherwise, why do we need that state? A question about aerial defense for district centers close to the front line. You did mention that one of the gliding bombs hit a multi-story building today in Kharkov, a residential building. Is there a way for us to put some air defense systems in those cities to protect them? Well, it's only Tor system that can shoot down these types of munitions. It was a special complex that was designed to shoot down cruise missiles and gliding bombs. But even if we had that many Tor system, it would have been a costly proposition to use them. It's a miscalculation to use these precious, limited quantities of special missiles that are capable to intercept these measures, cruise missiles and gliding bombs. Ideally, you'd need F-16s, well equipped for that. But we don't know when they will arrive and whether they will have the exactly needed array of munitions. So this task is not an easy to solve. So basically, Alexey, you're saying until F-16s get here with long-range missiles, it'll be difficult to cover. Yeah, there's not much we can do. All right, so it shows that Kharkov right now is a very vulnerable point on the front, and if you're looking at that from the Russian side, they're trying to create panic to make sure that every citizen of Kharkov is concerned, gravely concerned, and panicking. Right, their attempt is to make sure that they can present it as a catastrophe, that Ukraine cannot defend one of the bigger cities towards the front line. And Kharkov has air defense systems. They can intercept some things, but they cannot intercept S-300 missiles, which flies, for 40 seconds for several dozens of kilometers. Gliding bombs, that's also a difficult proposition to hit, and they're being launched from 70 to 80 kilometers distance. If Shahed UAVs are attacking Kharkov or cruise missile is being sent in that city, yeah, air defense will take care of them. But there are others that air defense systems are not capable to cover for. Even Kyiv would have issues with shooting down some of these systems. It's just Kyiv is further away from the border, so they cannot reach it that easily. All right, it's difficult to understand if I was in Kharkov, what would I be doing? I think I would have to leave, at least for, some kilometers out. I have a lot of friends and relatives in Kharkov, and when I'm talking to them, they're saying that they've got used to it somehow, and even school kids are going to schools and studying. Yeah, I know, they're great people, they're fantastic kind of people, they're still they're helping each other, they're repairing things after they get hit by bombs, and the city continues to live despite all odds. But still, in the conditions and the risks of their houses being destroyed, you think Russians want to cause all kind of damage and provoke panic? Is that the end goal? Plus, Budanov is saying that the story is going to last for just a few days, 3 to 4 days, till they'll carry it over to a different part of the front. Well, we're all adults, right? And we're talking to adults here. There are some problems that do not have a solution. And defense of Kharkov, from the current measures or means they're using on them, is unsolvable. If we get F-16s with the right type of munitions, with the long-range missiles, then we can probably do that. If F-16s arrive without long-range missiles, again, Kharkov will not be defendable. Each adult needs to make a decision. There are no advices we can give here. People need to make their own decisions about that, based on their current situation, resources, and everything. All right, let me clarify one more thing, Alexey. That statement by Budanov that he made, that attack on Kharkov will last for several days, and after that, they'll attack a different point. Well, that's his estimation. He is saying that attack from the north will last for the next 3 to 4 days, right? But the attacks will not stop. The attacks will continue going, because they were hitting it before, even before those attempts on the border. Even if they stop pushing the border, they will continue using missiles and bombs on Kharkov. This is a specificity of that city from here till the end of war. So what reaction do you think the office of the president needs to exert in relation to this anti-corruption publication that, for example, Kharkov Regional Administration paid millions of hryvnias to fictitious companies that otherwise should have been sent to building fortifications. Well, simple steps. If we can determine the guilty ones, we need to punish them. And then the next step would be to determine how do we prevent it and what were the reasons so it doesn't happen again. And number two is arguably a more important item that is being awaited by our society. And they will be more upset if they don't see the government acting on it. And it's not the first time. Remember Zaporozhye? Remember how many times Viktor Kurtyev is talking with Romanenko about how much money was stolen on the energy systems allocations. Billions of hryvnias. And periodically we catch some people and punish them, but has anybody thought about eliminating the reasons for it? Because any proper investigation, I would say, should start from reasons. Because what's the point of applying some iodine to your scraped knee? You need to understand how did that happen, right? So where is that fundamental investigation? Why things happening? Perhaps they will arrest somebody, they'll punish, maybe execute somebody for that, but there'll be more. Unless we find the core reason for that and address it, we'll never be able to stop that hydra. Just take a look at how many statements about corruption are coming to us from the West as well. From Johnson's aide to Nuland to Blinken. Well, to be honest, you did announce a while ago that the West will be addressing corruption, right? Yeah, there were many statements made by our partners today. Blinken, for example, said today that the elections will be carried when Ukrainian people will understand that they can conduct them. Now, a question, why all of a sudden he is talking about elections during his visit? Do you know how they train intel officers in the Spectre school, in their intel school? Look for presence of unusual and absence of usual. So he comes here to solve some issues and then makes a statement about elections, right? Why would he speak about elections? So for me, this is an indicator of the reason why he's here. Many people already tied that to the problem of 25th of May, perhaps. But for me, I see it as a diplomatic, but rather stern pointing to the root of an issue, of all these issues. And that's it. Let me clarify here. What do you mean? Do you think that Ukrainian people, since they agree that it's difficult to conduct elections now, that's why we have no elections? No, I think Blinken is just pointing at the main reason for all of our issues happening, to a certain building on Bankova Street. That's where the management is falling apart. That's where ineffective cadre decisions are being made. And that's where they cannot address corruption that is happening in the country. That's how I'm formulating it now. Cannot address. And these voices are formulating it differently in the West, and they're already saying it in a different fashion, a harder fashion. For example, aide to Johnson. Well, we'll get to Cummings too. He's an ex-aide to Johnson, right? He used to be. There was also a message from military correspondent Yuri Butusov to mayors of Ukrainian cities with an ask to try to help all brigades that are defending Kharkov with FPV drones acquisition. That brings us back to the promises of Zelensky about FPV drones, even back in Avdiivka times. Still not clear whether Avdiivka had enough of them or whether they were late. And here again, intelligence knew about Russian attack, about the imminence, and we don't have enough FPV drones. Right, we can ask that question. Where is that million of UAVs that were promised? It's been 5 months already, right? So at least 500,000 should have been there somewhere. Or we'll get the whole million on the 31st of December. They're just making it now, and it'll become available at the end of December, last day of the year. Cabinet of Ministers recently giddily reported about other 16 billion hryvnias dedicated to UAV production. Where? Here's an example. Army works like a factory. And if on the factory, the owner is driving a Maserati, for example, director is driving Mercedes, and his VP is driving Toyota. Meanwhile, their employees have not been paid salary for the last 3 months. What will happen with such a factory? It'll go bankrupt. In order for the company to work and continue working, 80% of their assets need to be involved in production. And it includes everything: materials, salaries, work, all the supply things with vacations, bonuses, and kindergartens and whatever. So we do look like a country where 80% is with the leadership, and on the front people don't get money. In order for us to be effective performers, 80% needs to be on the front, starting with socks, to helmets, to bulletproof vests, to ammo, armor, FPV drones, shells, everything. One should just be able to take an audit documents from Minister of Defense and see how much money is actually reaching soldiers on the front. I think if we ever do such an audit, we would be horrified. Because what is happening right now in Ukraine would be qualified as the company that would go bankrupt. And that's regardless of bravery of people on the front or managerial qualities of leadership. It's just about the system, the way how it works now. You know, I'm so upset with all these things happening, and I usually speak rather fluently, right? But first time in 2.5 years of this war, I stutter, because what's happening is such a total disaster that I barely am holding from not going to doing this stream in cuss words exclusively. And it's very difficult to, and that's why I keep stuttering today. First time, I didn't stutter at the beginning of this war. The level of inadequacy is beyond any capacity. And this is talking about strategic management of the country at war. When wrong decisions are being made because of wrong estimations, when right decisions are not being made, even though very often advised to be made. And now you can start hearing that opinion even from usual citizens who can already see it in their lives. This factory has big issues, right? That military factory. All right, let's say that we are supportive of Ukrainian armed forces. We are actually conducting a fundraiser for the artillery intel of the 67th Separate Brigade. We're gathering 1 million hryvnias for Mavic 3T. And it's important to try to finish this fundraiser. We already got 1/3 of it, right? Yes, we did. And you understand that artillery intel and their drones are very important elements, because artillery is the system that allows our infantry to live longer on the front. And artillery intel is basically the system allowing artillery to hit the right targets. So it is one of the key components, and that's why their components cost a lot. And they're asking for 1 million. We already gathered, actually, I just looked half of it. So let's finish with the other half. It's in the link to the Russian version of this video. End of part 1.